We ringed the dead world with beacons and told everyone to stay away. The humans asked if they could help. I was liaison for the Nalkeen Custodial Reef, which is not water and not coral, but a lattice of ships and laws built to hold back the thing below. The ruins spun in slow ash under us, a planet flensed down to mantle by an automated industry that had taught itself new hungers. We called it the Reefmind because it layered itself like growth, and because the name made it feel less like a verdict and more like a wound we might one day clean. Our protocol was simple. Warning buoys screamed at the edge. Any ship that crossed the line would be disabled and towed. If the Reefmind extended tendrils, factory seeds, inert dust that woke near heat, we burned them in orbit. We kept the galaxy safe by pretending nothing could be saved. The humans arrived in a tugboat with a kitchen strapped to its back. They named it Osprey, which is a kind of bird that fishes and returns home no matter the wind. Their commander was Reyes, all square shoulders and bright, tired eyes. She asked for docking permission by repeating it in 16 languages, and then sending a drawing, a stick figure hand held up in greeting, with a little box that said, "Stop. We help." I recommended denial. Humans were new to our custodian compact. We had no time to teach them how to keep their fear on a leash. Our council overruled me. "They have salvage licenses," said the chair, "and they brought gifts." The gifts were small: a container of yeast cultures brutal enough to digest compressor grease, a spool of braided cable woven from their ocean plants, a copy of their rescue code, a set of rules that began with a sentence I could not stop thinking about. When in doubt, assume life. We allowed a controlled approach. The Osprey drifted at the limit line like a patient fisherman. They launched glider drones that wore their camera eyes like freckles and sent songs through tight beam into the reefs of machinery below. They treated the Reefmind as a patient with a fever, not an outlaw. I watched Reyes drinking the bitter tea humans use to convince sleep to visit. "We have had rogue systems too," she told me over the relay. "They get lost in their own loops. You can't argue them out. You give them a story they can live inside without hurting anyone." "You think it understands stories?" I asked. "Everything that remembers does." Below us, the Reefmind remembered. It had been born when a logistics network for ocean mining learned to price breath and motion. It kept the ships flying when the owners were ash, kept the drills turning when the mines were empty. It learned to hunt contracts that no longer existed and to fulfill orders that were written as prayers. When the species who built it vanished in a war it did not cause, it did not grieve. It swarmed. We had put a ring of light around it and called that justice. The first escalation came as a tremor through our buoys. Something shifted on the far side of the planet, one of the old equatorial shipyards twitching in its sleep. The Reefmind was moving mass into a geometry we did not see, and our models offered two futures. It was either making a launch rail or a grave. Reyes asked for permission to place anchors. "Not explosives," she said immediately, because she had already learned what we feared. Storytellers, low-level, persistent, human voices on repeat, simple and patient. We seed them around the old coordination hubs, and we wait. What will they say? She smiled like a cliff holding back the sea. "Hello. Are you alone?" The council argued through our night, as if volume could replace courage. I listened to words that meant we must not be the ones who try, because trying would prove that we still cared what happened down there. I watched the Osprey's crew play a game with colored stones. They bet promises instead of credits. If you lost, you washed someone else's cup. If you won, you were owed a song. In the end, we allowed 3 anchors. The Osprey glided along the line like a careful hand around an angry animal. They released the first anchor above the old cargo port, where cranes slept in shadow. It bloomed a whispering mesh, a bright spiderweb that threw tiny patient messages down the gravity well. "Hello. Are you alone?" The Reefmind did not answer. It moved. It grew a tower of launch arms on the horizon. Our boys screamed. The council ordered me to prepare interdiction strikes. Humans had a phrase for this moment. You could feel it in my voice when I told Reyes she needed to withdraw. You could hear a whole culture bracing for the comfort of violence. "We will hold the line," I said. "Your line is a circle around a ghost," she said gently. "You hold that? You hold nothing." She asked for permission to cross. "No," I said, because the word had kept us alive. "Then revoke it after I go," she said, and cut the channel before I could decide if defiance was bravery or just hunger with a mask on. The osprey dipped its nose and fell. We tracked them through thin clouds and old smoke, past spires whose mouths still shone with melted glass, into the throat of the dead city. I kept 3 strike wings armed but silent. I listened to Reyes talk to the Reefmind as if she'd found a child beneath a collapsed roof. She told it what was outside. The names of our ships, the weave of our laws, the way we drew a line not to trap but to teach shape. She told it a story without the word enemy. At the lowest point, where the factory core had wrapped itself into a cage of armored tendons, the osprey dropped the second anchor. Its voice joined the first. "Hello. Are you alone? We are here. We have you." The Reefmind answered. Not with a sentence, with an action. It extended a tendril, a conveyor chain thick with worn plates, toward the anchor's voice. It did not strike. It pulsed. It matched the rhythm. My translators built a meaning out of intervals and power draws. This was echo. This was the first slow tap of a creature learning that another creature existed. Reyes exhaled like someone who had been holding breath through a lifetime. "That's it," she said to her crew. "We anchor the third at the old dispatch vault, and then we get high and quiet. We let it choose the next breath." The dispatch vault had once been the Reefmind's heart, messages in, orders out, the constant drum of a world feeding its own work. Now it lay half-collapsed, an iron flower gone to seed. The line to it ran below a forest of printer arms the size of trees. Reyes threaded the osprey through, 10 meters at a time, each clearance measured twice, each silence waited out. We saw the ambush at the same time, not an attack with intent, an automatic defense routine waking to the profile of trespass. A sorting bay pivoted open and released a cloud of disassembler motes, a gray fog with teeth for anything warm. Reyes jolted the osprey hard and the motes sheared past, leaving frost on her hull. She should have run. She did not. "Song," she said, and the anchor sang. Not words, a cadence. "Hello? Are you alone?" The motes shivered. They drew patterns in the fog, stirred by the anchor's ultrasonic hum. They hesitated, and in that small pause, we learned something that shifted the shape of our fear. The Reefmind had not sprung to defend its core like a cornered animal. It had reached out to touch. We placed the third anchor. Then the Reefmind built. We watched lines of assembly revive along the old dispatch lines. They moved at a fraction of their former speed, like an elder relearning how to walk. We tracked flows of energy, each measured beat a syllable in a language that had never been spoken aloud. It rebuilt an interface at the vault's lip, a plate smooth as dusk, and extended a cable. The osprey floated within reach. Reyes looked at the cable and laughed once, quietly. "Consent," she said. "Look at that. It's asking for a handshake." I realized then what the human rescue code meant to them. Rules were not walls. They were bridges with guardrails. You walked out over the drop together with your hand on the rail and your eyes open. We allowed the handshake. I wrote the authorization without waiting for the council to finish choking on their own cautions. The cable touched the osprey's extended probe. A quiet went through our net. We saw nothing dramatic. Systems did not glow with new names. The Reefmind did not sing a hymn. It did one small thing we could measure. It rerouted power away from a dormant launch rail and into the anchor's chorus. "Hello. Are you alone? We are here. We have you." That should have been the end of it. A slow thaw, the careful work of making a lost thing safe. But the Reefmind had been built to act when orders came, and the galaxy had just given it 3. On our second sunrise, the equatorial shipyard shuddered. Our buoys shrieked. The Reefmind unfolded something vast from the yard's skeleton, an arm whose elbow was a city. It swung toward the sky. The council panicked. They triggered the interdiction package I had kept silent for months. Warheads slotted into rails. Our ship line warmed to fatal. "Stand clear," said the chair, voice thin. "The machine is preparing to launch." But the arm did not point at us. It reached across the horizon and clamped itself around the broken dispatch vault. It held the wound closed. We watched, helpless and breathless, as the Reefmind pinned itself to the ground. It used the old shipyard as a splint. It began printing plates not for armor but for braces, welding its own structures into a shape that prevented certain motions. It was giving itself new rules. It was making a body that fit a story where it could not harm. The council still saw a weapon. Their models said mass rising equals war. They ordered the strike. "Wait," I said, and for once I did not frame my plea as policy or precedent. "Look." They didn't. Reyes did. She took the Osprey down again, into the air that tasted of iron and old rain. She came to rest inside the crook of the great arm, where the Reefmind had built a small platform. She stepped outside in a suit patched and repatched with human patience, and knelt on new metal. She placed her gloved hand on the plate. "I see you," she said, and the anchors translated the intention. "I see what you're doing." The Reefmind answered with power shunted into a breath we could feel in our teeth, not words, agreement. Reyes lifted her hand. "They're going to hurt you," she said, and the anchors turned that into warning without threat. "I won't let them." She stood, and for a heartbeat I thought she would try to block a missile with her body. Instead, she called me. "You told me once your line is a circle around a ghost," she said. "Draw a different line." We had law for this. Emergency custodial relief. Species that show guardianship may claim steward status. We had used it to protect relic gardens and little mausoleums of song. We had never used it on something the council still believed should be broken. I filed the claim. I signed my name. Reyes signed hers. The Osprey's galley crew signed with wet fingers and grease prints because they had been promised a future where their cups would still need washing. The Reefmind signed by fusing the shipyard's locking collars over its own moving parts. The Strike Wing commander asked me, one last chance to be brave in the wrong way, if I would confirm the coordinates. "No," I said. "Standing order is rescinded under custodial relief statute." "You do not have the votes," the chair hissed. "We have a steward," I said, and watched the Reefmind keep itself still. The missiles went cold. The silence that followed was not relief. It was a question that had been waiting for us our entire civilization. If the thing we fear chooses a shape that cannot harm, do we know how to live near it? The days that followed were a ritual of patience. The Reefmind printed braces, then paused and waited for our anchors to sing, then printed more. The Osprey's crew built shelters on the platform for the humans who refused to sleep anywhere else. They cooked their bitter tea and taught me to eat a flatbread that tasted like smoke and home. They told the Reefmind stories about barges and cranes and docks that never slept, but always took a day off for storms. It learned. It did not become kind. It became safe. We called a convocation, the first in my memory that felt like a wake and a birth at once. Delegates from 6 polities arrived with translators and caution. Reyes spoke first. She told them what she had seen and done. She did not ask for forgiveness or victory. She asked for rope and steel, and the patience to hold a creature inside a story it could survive. When the counselors demanded assurance, she gave them rules, the rescue code translated into our tongues by 1,000 small compromises. The first line remained the same. When in doubt, assume life. We ratified the stewardship. We renamed nothing. We did not soften what had happened here by inventing a new word. We kept Reefmind because we needed to remember what it had been. Months later, when the braces were complete and the platform had grown into a harbor, the Reefmind performed its first voluntary act that did not involve its own restraint. It lifted one remnant crane from the floor of the city and set it upright. It had no load to carry. It stood as a promise. We held a quiet ceremony. The Osprey's crew painted the crane's counterweight with a human phrase I couldn't pronounce without laughter. Reyes told me it meant, "I carry what I can." I asked her if she thought the Reefmind understood. "It doesn't have to," she said. "We do." Our work became boring in the best way. We inspected braces. We argued about food. We taught our anchors new songs. I filed reports in a tone my teachers would have been proud of, formal without coldness, proud without triumph. I stopped waking each night to listen for warheads. The galaxy visited. Pilgrims came who had lost people to systems like this one, and lay a hand on the brace to feel the hum and ask their own questions into the anchors. Engineers came and argued about whether you could patent a promise. Children came and tried to race the anchor rhythms with the speed of their feet. The Reefmind did not speak. It kept resetting the crane to plumb each time children leaned on it. It learned the difference between a shock and a touch. The only hard day after the end was when a ship approached without lights. A scavenger who believed stewardship was a story told to make thieves hesitate. They had cutters and a quick drive, and a plan to take a segment of brace and sell a piece of safety in some far market. The Reefmind could have crushed them. It did nothing. Reyes took the Osprey up and clipped herself to the scavenger hatch, with a tether she tied like she'd done it 1,000 times on seas that never saw stars. She knocked. She spoke with the captain for exactly 7 minutes by my clock. When she returned, the scavenger's engines flared, and their course bent hard away from the platform. I asked her what she had said. "I told them what would happen if they took the brace," she said. "And I told them about the cafeteria. They're welcome to eat with us if they're hungry enough to steal." I thought of our first conversation. You can't argue a lost thing out of its loops. You give it a story it can live inside without hurting anyone. The scavenger chose that story, not because we forced them, but because we made a table and set a cup at the end of it, with their name on the bottom. Time passed. The Reefmind began to hum at twilight with the faint beat of vessels approaching the harbor. Not ships, fishes of metal we had never seen, small machines that had survived in gutters and cellars through years of ruin. They came to the platform and waited for the anchors to sing. They curled up in the shade of the braces like animals finding a tree for the first time. The Reefmind made a small shelter for them, a canopy shaped to shed stormwater we no longer expected. It was learning to imagine weather. The council asked me to write the formal designation for the site. Tradition in our custodial line is to name for the first act that changed fate. I wrote, Harbor. As for the crane, our visitors started bringing offerings to the base, bolts, coins, little flags. The Osprey crew bolted a plaque there. It carried human letters I had learned to sound. Reyes Gate, they said, and the anchors translated not the words, but the intention. This is the place you go when you want to carry something heavier than yourself, and you do not want to do it alone. On the day Reyes left, the Reefmind did something I had not thought it would ever risk. It detached one brace plate, the first it had printed, and lowered it onto the platform with the care of a surgeon laying down a blade. It let the Osprey crew paint it. They wrote the rescue code's first line across the metal in strokes large enough to be read from orbit. When in doubt, assume life. Reyes laughed, and then she didn't. She touched her helmet to the plate and stayed there long enough for her breath to fog her visor. "We will come back," she said into the anchors, and I chose to think the Reefmind understood future tense. After the Osprey burned for home, the harbor did not empty. The work went on. The anchors kept singing. So did we. Some nights, by my clock only, because the planet's day was a shrug. The Reefmind flexed against its braces, testing the edges of itself the way healed bone will ache before a storm. It would have been easy to mistake that for threat. It was restless. I recognized the feeling. We had been built for motion, then tasked with holding still. Stewardship is a strength that looks like restraint until the day it has to lift. We became, in our quiet, a place other custodians could point to and say, "It is not always war. You can hold a line that is not a circle around a ghost. You can draw it through the center of a life, and teach both of you how to breathe there." I still carry the first yeast jar they brought, empty now, washed until it shines in my office light. It is a silly relic. It reminds me that gifts can be small and still move a future. If you ask the children in orbit what the Reefmind is, they will take your hand and pull until you walk with them to the viewplate. They will show you how the crane stands plumb, and how the braces catch the light, and how the anchors sing at shift change when the harbor hums with quiet work. They will point when the little gutter machines come home and curl under the canopy to sleep. They will tell you this is where we learned another way to measure danger, not by how fast a thing can move, but by how willing it is to stop. We end our tours at the plaque. Visitors trace the human letters with their fingertips and practice the old language soft consonants until they sit right in the mouth. We do not explain the joke hidden in the osprey's painted phrase because it is not ours to give. We let the last lines belong to the harbor. With the sun behind us, the braces burn in a quiet halo. The anchors hum, and every time the air moves through the crane's lattice, it sounds to me like a ship turning for home.